Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Sirena Lounge. My name is Andy. I'm the cruise director, and you see the big smile on my face because I absolutely love the fact of what we do at Oceania, and that is to provide these enrichment programs, because wherever we might sail, and particularly in the parts of the world we're in now, we hope to bring your experience from here way up to here, and we do that by bringing on experts, by bringing on people who are passionate, who have a knowledge, who can share their information in these presentations, but also out and about the ship. That's what I love about our ships being this size, because you'll be able to see our guest lecturers all throughout and maybe enjoy a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner with them, or a tour, and have a little bit of one-on-one time as well. All of the presentations, they take place right here, and it will be only live. You can't watch it on television when it's live. But yes, we record them. And so afterwards, you can always check your daily currents, and you'll find which channels that they are on, so you'll be able to catch them or see them again as it goes on. But I know you're not here for me. I'd like to introduce you now to our enrichment lecturer. His name, Dr. James Koos, and he is an emeritus professor, a professional archaeologist. He's been all over the world, but particularly in Central and South America. He has extensive experience and knowledge of South and Central America through teaching at Peru's top university, leading archaeological projects, and publishing extensively on geography, archaeology, and history. We are thrilled to bring him to you here on the Sirena. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. James Koos.
Thank you, Andy. Some of you may have heard when Andy said last night, we were actually together on the Mariner, Regent Mariner. So he got off a month ago in Miami. I got off a month ago in Miami. We went through the canal from Los Angeles to Miami in the opposite direction. So I really like Andy. Unfortunately, his wife's not with us. I liked his wife better. No, can't say that. Let me give you a very quick background for me.
You know I'm still here.
I can see you back there. I got my bachelor's degree from Western Reserve University, now Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. My master's is from Michigan State. My BA was in history. My master's was in geography. Form of the research for my master's, I went down to Peru for the first time in 1966 and did a master's thesis there. It was half geography and half archaeology, and I decided for the PhD I wanted to do archaeology. I went to UCLA. At that time, UCLA did not have an archaeology degree, so I was in the geography department. My PhD is in geography, but it was an archaeology PhD. Just afterwards, they set up an archaeology program. I could have been the first archaeology PhD at UCLA, but they said you had to come back and take a couple of courses. I said, I'm teaching in this department. I don't need it. I'll get a geography PhD. I've been to Peru many, many times since then. I spent a total of about 8 years there. I haven't been to Peru since September. I go usually at least once a year for a week or two just to see what's going on with archaeology, catch up with things, so forth. The lecture today is called The Early Spanish Main, and I take that title from a book by the same name, Early Spanish Main. It was written by a man by the name of Carl Ortwin Sauer. And I don't expect many of you know this name. Sauer was a professor at UC Berkeley from the mid-1920s to the mid-1960s. I think retired in '64. If you are going to be a professor that has a lot of influence on the world, you can do that a couple of different ways. You can do it by publishing, writing, research, and Sauer clearly did that. He has books that are still very good still today. But you can also do it by having lots of good students. And over the years, Sauer had many, many good students. The chair of my doctoral commission, paper dissertation, was one of Sauer's very first students, 1932, I think. One of the other members of my doctoral committee was one of Sauer's last students. At UCLA, I also took courses from Sauer's son, who was a professor there. I was a teaching assistant at UCLA for another of Sauer's students. So I am really a student of Carl Sauer, a student of students of Carl Sauer. But he wrote this book. He referred to the Spanish Main as the early Caribbean and the adjacent parts of the mainland, which is the area that we'll be talking about today. And what I'm really going to do today is spend time with Columbus, talk about his voyages, but also a little bit before Columbus and a little bit afterwards. Now, I'm what's called a destination lecturer, and I'm usually talking about things for our next port. I have to tell you, I have never been to the Cayman Islands. When we've come through on other voyages, we've stopped in Aruba or Curacao or Jamaica or Havana, but Cayman Islands first time, so I can't talk anything about Georgetown or the Cayman Islands. At the end of today's lecture, I will talk about Cartagena, our second port, and the reason for that is that I want to do it today to give me more time 2 days from now when I talk about the Panama Canal. We want to really have a lot of time for the Panama Canal. And in point of fact, I usually have 45 minutes for these lectures, but Andy is giving me about an hour and a half for the Panama Canal lecture because we have so much to cover in that talk. I'm going to start my story in a year that maybe is a little bit before our time here. I'm going to start the story in 711 AD, or CE. CE referring to current era, because we lecture on ships with a variety of people, backgrounds, cultures. It's politically correct these days to use current era rather than AD, which really applies only to countries that are Christian. Anybody know what happened in 711 AD that is of some significance to our story? The invasion of Spain. The Muslim forces from North Africa invaded Spain in 711 AD. Within just a few years, literally less than a generation, they had completely conquered the Iberian Peninsula. They had gone as far as central France, just a few miles outside of what is today Paris. In 732 AD, which is exactly 100 years after the death of Muhammad, there was a battle near Paris with the Christian forces led by a man by the name of Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, grandfather of Charlemagne, and the Muslim forces were defeated for the first time and began a retreat at that point in time, 732. And over the years, the Muslim forces were pushed back in the Iberian Peninsula in what we call the Reconquest. Now, if you think about it, the Reconquest starts in 732. It lasts all the way to 1492 with the ultimate defeat. So it's over 700 years. That's longer, double the time of the United States being in existence. It is a long period of time. And it's not 700 some years of constant fighting. It's periods of peace. It's periods of time when the Muslim forces advanced, when the Christian forces advanced, when the line between the two groups was set and then stable, and then battles took place and so forth. The story of discovery of the Western Hemisphere ties in a lot with trying to get stuff from Asia. And on this map, the blue lines represent water routes from Europe to Asia, and the red line represents an overland route, the Silk Road. On the water route, one of the big things we need to keep in mind is the monsoons. If you sail with the monsoons, if you're sailing from Africa or the Mediterranean or Red Sea and you're trying to get to Asia, if you sail between April and September, the winds are pushing you in that direction. And if you sail between November and February, you're going against the winds, or you can come back home very easily. We tend to think that there probably wasn't too much trade going back. I mean, most people think there wasn't probably too much trade. If you go back to the Roman times, 1st, 2nd, 3rd century AD, an average of about 300 ships left the Red Sea every year heading to Asia. There was extensive trade between Asia and the Mediterranean area. Incidentally, one of the other things I want to point out with these lectures, the first time I was lecturing, and I think it was on this ship, first time I was on one of the R-class Oceania ships, I think it was the Sirena, it may have been the Regatta, I was used to pointing out things with a laser pointer. And when I came and started lecturing in here, I realized I can't do that. I cannot point out things on 3 different screens with my laser pointer. So you'll notice in many of my lectures, arrows will fly in. If I need to point out something, there will be an arrow that flies in. So it doesn't matter which of the 3 screens you're watching. If you're here live, you will be able to see what I'm pointing out. I don't have to use the laser pointer very often. But lots of things were being traded from Asia, things that Europe wanted. Spices were probably the biggest thing. Those days, they did not have refrigeration. They did not have very many ways of preserving, particularly meat. They could dry meat, they could salt meat, but there wasn't much in the way of preserving things. And spices disguised the flavor of bad food. So spices were important. Silks were there, paper was there, porcelains. And in exchange, about the only thing that the Asians wanted from Europe were gold and silver, particularly gold, and some people also suggest that ivory coming from Africa was an important thing. But Asia was where the good stuff was coming from. That gets us to another date in history that is significant. Anybody know what the significance of 1453 is? Anyone? I hear the name Columbus, and it has nothing to do with Columbus. 1453, the Ottoman Turks captured Constantinople, which cut off trade in the Eastern Mediterranean to Asia. There had been talk, and there had been efforts by the Ottomans to cut off that trade. They didn't completely cut off the trade. What they really did was added duties and taxes. There's some controversy these days about duties being added onto imports and exports and so forth, but we won't get into local politics today. But the thing what was happening was that the Europeans did not have good access after 1453 to the products of Asia that they had been getting. So actually, this guy is actually a little bit before 1453. Prince Henry the Navigator was the son of the Portuguese king. There you can see his dates. And what Prince Henry did was to set up a school, or to bring together a group of people who would work to develop navigation, to improve Portuguese navigation. They included geographers, astronomers, sailors, engineers, scholars, and so forth. And they supported a number of voyages along the coast of Africa. They developed a better type of ship that could go out in the open ocean. It's called the caravel. There you see it. And they began a series of voyages along the coast of Africa, the west coast of Africa. If you look at this map up at the very top, 1434, down at the bottom, 1446. Every year, the Portuguese were going a little bit farther into the unknown area, unknown world. Actually, Phoenicians probably had already sailed around Africa, circumnavigated Africa before the time of Christ. So this is not something that they were the first people to ever do this. The next guy of some import is this man, Bartholomew Diaz. Diaz was a nobleman, a man of a good family. He had already captained a warship, and the King of Portugal in 1487 authorized him to go on an expedition to go farther than anybody had gone before. And he was the first European in this period of time. Again, Phoenicians had done it earlier, but he was the first guy in this period of time to have rounded the Cape of Good Hope in the southernmost part of Africa. They did not sail up the east side of Africa very far and quickly returned to Lisbon. But that leads us to Vasco da Gama, who follows up on this. And da Gama was actually half English, so he's not completely Portuguese. But what he did was he joined a noble order, an order of knights, the Order of Santiago, which was sponsored by the king, so he was in good standing. And he was given 4 ships and told to go farther than what Diaz had done just a couple years before. So he sails around the Cape of Good Hope. He sails up the east side of Africa. He explores along that coast. He finds a man who is a pilot who regularly sailed at that time from East Africa to India, that knew the route, so he's got a guy to guide them, and he goes across the Indian Ocean, and he's doing it right. He's got the monsoon behind him. It only takes him 23 days to get from the coast of Africa to India. He quickly returns. He loads up with spices and sails back. Unfortunately, he doesn't realize he's got to wait until the monsoon changes, so he sails back. It takes him, instead of about 3 weeks, it takes him 3 months. And in the course of that, he loses 1 ship and many of his men. He's only got 2 ships and about 55 guys out of over 170, so he's lost 2/3 of his men. But when he gets back to Lisbon, he has made 6 times what the expedition cost. So a 600% return for the investors that had spent money on this voyage. Back in Spain, in the same period of time that the Portuguese are doing their exploring around Africa, Spain had become united by the marriage of Ferdinand and Isabella, the prince and princess of 2 of the kingdoms, 2 of the major kingdoms of Spain. And during their reign, they reconquered Spain. That long 700-year period of kicking out the Moors, driving the Moors out, reconquering Spain for the Roman Catholic Church was taking place. And the ultimate conquest is in Granada in southern Spain in January of 1492. There's Ferdinand and Isabella. One of the first things they did, as soon as they said, you have to, we've done the conquest, people who were not Catholic had to leave Spain. Spain was only going to be for Catholics. Now, this had been the rule basically during much of the reconquest. As they reconquered territory, Muslims would have to either go to the Muslim areas as refugees, or they could convert. And in Spanish, a converted one is called a converso. Many of the Muslims became conversos. Jews also had to convert and become conversos. Some of those conversos continued to practice either their Muslim or Jewish religions while being nominally Catholic. And the Spanish didn't like this. The Spanish Catholics didn't like this. They created an institution to root out those people who were nominally Catholic, the conversos, that weren't really converted. We call that institution anyone know? The Inquisition. When we're in Cartagena, many of you will visit the house that is the House of the Inquisition in Cartagena. But the Inquisition is basically designed to focus on the people who are not officially, not completely Catholic. Muslims and Jews have to leave. They had to leave by August 1st, 1492. Many of them did leave. Some went to North Africa, some went to the Eastern Mediterranean, some went to other parts of Western Europe. Spain was now completely Catholic, so that they could focus for the first time on external things like the Portuguese had been doing for several decades. And the other thing about this ending of the reconquest is that for centuries, a young man who was of a poor family or was the younger son of a wealthy family could make their mark in life in the battles of the reconquest. It was a way of upward mobility for young men who really didn't have much of a chance in life. That was eliminated when the reconquest was over, except that those same ambitious young men could get involved in explorations outside of the Iberian Peninsula. So we get people, this guy you may have heard of, Christopher Columbus. He was not actually Spanish. He was from Genoa, but born in Genoa. He was sailing on a Genoese ship in the Eastern Mediterranean as a very young man when he's in his early 20s. We know he sailed to England, we know he got to Ireland, and we think he got to Iceland. Now, Iceland is kind of an important part of the story that a lot of people forget about. If he did get to Iceland in the 1480s, probably, late 70s, 1470s, early 1480s, we don't know the exact date, something was interesting in Iceland at that point in time. There had just been, a couple years before, a lawsuit in Iceland. There was a couple who were married, but could not prove that they were officially married. And they had to have a court testimony. People had to swear that they had been married. They had been married in a church in Greenland in the 1430s. And in the 1450s, there's a lawsuit in Iceland. They had migrated back from Greenland to Iceland, and they were suing to demonstrate that they were married. That's just a generation before Columbus. People would have still known the story of these people who swore in court they had been married someplace over there to the west in Greenland. So there were people in Iceland who knew the story of that there were lands that people lived at farther to the west. And Columbus may well have heard those stories when he was in Iceland. He did sail in some of these expeditions of the Portuguese along the west coast of Africa, and he began to make presentations to the King of Portugal saying, I want to go west. I don't want to go around Africa. I want to go west to get to Asia. He made his presentations to Isabella and Ferdinand in Spain, and by about 1489, they began to support Columbus financially. He actually had to find investors to get his ships. Probably at least 2 of his ships were owned by people that were not connected to Columbus, and he was just kind of bringing along because they had the money. So early 1492, after the Reconquest, in that 1492 period between the Reconquest and the expulsion of the Jews and Muslims, he gets ready for his voyage. And he sails on August 3rd, 1492, from the port of Palos. Now, Palos is not a very important port these days. It's just a small town. If you've ever been in Spain, it's about 20 miles west of Cadiz. Just a year ago, I was on Oceania Marina and sailed from Lisbon just about this time. I don't remember. It was either the 20th or 21st, 22nd from Lisbon. Our first stop was in Cadiz, and Columbus had sailed from this little port of Palos a few miles to the west, obviously 1492. He actually saw 2 days earlier the last ships of people being expelled from Spain just before he set sail. He sailed south to the Canary Islands, picked up fresh water and fruits and vegetables, and sailed west. They touched in the Bahamas just about a month later, just about 5 weeks later. It was not any real long voyage. I think all of you know the story, Santa Maria, Nina, the Pinta, 2 smaller ships. They explored the north coast of Cuba. They touched on the island of Hispaniola, which is now Haiti and Dominican Republic, on December 5th. They sailed along the north coast of Hispaniola. On Christmas Day of 1492, the big ship, Santa Maria, sinks, hits some rocks and goes down. On the 2 smaller ships, he does not have enough room for everybody, so he leaves 40 guys behind on the island of Hispaniola, in the settlement they call La Navidad because the ship sank on Christmas Day, Navidad. Here's a little closer view on this map. They come in from the upper right, the red line there, from the upper right corner from the Canary Islands. They touch in the Bahamas. There's always debate as to exactly which island they first saw in the Bahamas. They sail south to the north coast of Cuba. They go back and forth and back and forth. And again, I'll use the laser pointer here, but there is a spot along the northwest coast of the island of Hispaniola, what is today Haiti, and archaeologists have found the spot, La Navidad, where this first little settlement was set up. He stops in the Azores and Lisbon. He actually tells the Portuguese about his discoveries before he gets to Ferdinand and Isabella back in Spain. And he does, while he's in Lisbon, meet with, he met with Bartolomé Diaz, and some people suggest he was seen, at least Magellan saw Columbus in 1492. He may not have talked with him. He's only a young man at that point in time. Quickly, he organizes a second expedition. And so 6 months after getting back to Spain, he's off on his second voyage. This time, he's got a much bigger fleet. He's got 17 ships. He's got almost 2,000 men, or 1,200 men. They make their stop in the Canary Islands for water and fresh fruit and vegetables and sail west. They touch in the Lesser Antilles and spend a little bit of time exploring there. They go to La Navidad, and they don't find anybody. They find 11 bodies. The other 19, or the other 29 guys have completely disappeared. Presumably, during the absence of Columbus, when he went back to Portugal and Spain, those men did something which caused the local population to be unhappy with them, and those guys got killed. They sail east along the coast of Hispaniola. They find a spot for a settlement, and given that they had all these guys, over 1,000 men, they set up a settlement now called La Isabela, named after the Queen. It does not last very long. Columbus leaves his brother in charge and sails back to Cuba and then to Spain. On this map, they come in from the bottom right, or the middle right. They sail through the Lesser Antilles. They go along what is today the south coast of Puerto Rico. They go to La Isabela. They set up their settlement they go to La Navidad and then to La Isabela. They circle around. They do some exploring. They explore the south side of Cuba, and then he goes back to Spain. His third voyage has 6 ships, 3 of which, when they get to the Caribbean, go to La Isabela, resupply. The other 3 ships go along the south coast, the north coast of South America, what is today Trinidad and the coast of Venezuela. They clearly have reached the mouth of the Orinoco River, big river, fresh water. They know that coming from a large continent. And they do find a few things of value, pearls along the coast of Venezuela, and also a little bit of gold. When they get back to Hispaniola, they find that Isabella has been abandoned, and there's now a new settlement on the south coast of Hispaniola, Santo Domingo. And Columbus is there for about 2 years. He's not a good governor. When another group of people arrive, another governor arrives, he's sent back to Spain in disgrace. So the third voyage here, from the very bottom right, they come in and touch on Trinidad and explore along the northeast coast of what is today Venezuela. They go to Hispaniola, and ultimately he's in Santo Domingo for a couple of years before going back to Spain in disgrace. He convinces Ferdinand and Isabella to let him do one more voyage to find the mainland of China, and he thinks he's found Asia. So this time he's got 4 ships, and he's going to find the mainland, Asia. When they get to Santo Domingo, their first stop, the governor at that time, now a man by the name of Bobadilla, does not let him land. Columbus, though, thinks is smart enough to think that there is a hurricane coming. He can read the signs, and he takes his 4 ships and leaves Santo Domingo and sails west and goes up an estuary and finds safe anchorage. Bobadilla has treasure. They have found a little bit of gold on Hispaniola. They've organized it. They're sending it back. And Bobadilla returns to Spain with the first cargo of gold from the Western Hemisphere in the face of that hurricane, and is never seen again. Totally lost. Columbus, though, is able to sail from Hispaniola west. He actually goes first towards Cuba and then sails west to what is today Honduras, and explores for several months the east side of Central America, Honduras, what is today Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and ultimately continuing south to Panama. And they do find gold. Their people there do have some gold. He decides to head back to Hispaniola. He's lost one of the ships. One of the ships sinks apparently along the coast of Panama, and then decides to head back to Hispaniola. He's got 3 ships left. They've been in the Caribbean for, at this point, 2 years, and the ships are sinking. Worms have gotten into the wood, and the ships are leaking. They stop in Jamaica, and they realize they cannot get on, go further. Takes them about a year to decide they got to do something. They ultimately construct a small boat. A few men from Jamaica sail to Hispaniola, bring a ship back, and the rest of the men are saved. Columbus then goes back to Spain, and that's the last we hear of him. He dies in 1506. Again, a map here. I think it's important to look at the line on this map. They come in on the right-hand side of this map, the red line. They go through the Lesser Antilles. They get to Santo Domingo. They hide out to the west of Santo Domingo in an estuary through this hurricane. Then they sail and they reach Cuba. And when they reach Cuba, you know, Columbus has always got to make decisions. Do we go this way? Do we go that way? Do we go left? Do we go right? Do we go east? Do we go west? If Columbus, when he was touching on Cuba, had decided to sail west from that point in Cuba, here at the upper left-hand corner of our map, just a little ways west, he would have touched on Yucatan, the Mayas, civilization. Rich civilization. Actually, that's about where we are right now. We're sailing right around here, the west side of Cuba today. But he doesn't. He goes south. He chooses to go south rather than west. And again, they go south and they touch on the north coast of Honduras. Again, he makes a choice. Do I go left? Do I go right? If he goes right, or west at that point, he would have sailed into the Gulf of Honduras. He would have touched on Guatemala. Again, high civilization, the Mayas. But he doesn't. He goes east along the northeast coast of Honduras and Nicaragua, one of the least populated parts of Central America even today. It's what's called the Mosquito Coast. It is not a very pleasant part of the world, very hot, humid, marshy lands, rainforest. He sails along the east side of Central America all the way down to Panama, and ultimately he decides to go back. And if you look on the map, he goes straight north towards Cuba. I told you his ships weren't in good shape. He'd already lost one. If he had sailed not straight north, if he'd sailed northeast, he would have reached Hispaniola easily. But no, he goes the long way, and ultimately they get stranded in Jamaica. So he made a number of unfortunate choices on that 4th voyage. He could have discovered, he would have been the first European to have contact with high civilization in the Western Hemisphere, with the Mayas, but he didn't. A couple of other things we need to talk about quickly. The Treaty of Tordesillas. The Portuguese had sailed around Africa and knew the results of Columbus's voyage before the Spanish did. And at that point in time, we're talking here the 1492, 1493, the Pope was actually more allied with the Portuguese than with the Spanish. So the Portuguese have the influence, and they get the Pope to issue a papal order, a papal bull, that divides the world between the Portuguese and the Spanish. What will be Portuguese territory and Spanish territory. The first letter, the first bull, sets it a few miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. it's modified in a second line to be moved farther west, and ultimately what's called the Treaty of Tordesillas sets the line a fair distance west of the Cape Verde Islands, which were Portuguese territory. And in theory, that line would go all the way around the world. Half the world would be Portuguese and half the world Spanish. That is the Treaty of Tordesillas. It does exist in, I think, the Vatican Library. And here are the lines. The first line that was set in 1493 is to the right, and the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas line is to the west. You notice that the big thing about the lines is that it gives ultimately a portion of South America to the Portuguese. And the Spanish get the rest of Western Hemisphere for themselves. They're a little bit better. The red area here in South America becomes Portuguese because of the readjustment of the line. It does suggest the Portuguese have more influence with the Pope, and it also suggests that perhaps the Portuguese know something about South America in 1494 that the Spanish don't. So the big question is, had the Portuguese, either Diaz or one of the people before, touched on South America? We don't know, but clearly the readjustment of the line farther to the west does suggest that the Portuguese knew about South America at this point in time. So half the world becomes Spanish and half the world becomes Portuguese, at least in terms of exploration and settlement. There is a further line in 1529 after what's called the Treaty of Saragossa. If you drew the line all the way around the world, it wouldn't show up where the Treaty of Saragossa line is, but by this time the Portuguese accepted that line there. The effect of the Treaty of Saragossa line is that the Pacific Ocean becomes basically Spanish territory. On this map, the red is areas that were open for Spanish exploration and settlement. Portugal got the areas in blue. And if you notice in South America, the Portuguese cheated and went a little past the line in what is today southern Brazil. The Spanish also cheated, went across the Treaty of Zaragoza line here on the right-hand side of the map and got the Philippines. But to get to the Philippines, they had to go via the Pacific Ocean. And we'll talk more about that when I have a lecture on Mexico and the Acapulco area, because the galleons going across the Pacific always left from Acapulco. And there's a very nice museum that I'll talk about in Acapulco, very close to the cruise terminal, that some of you may want to visit. Very quickly, and this will be our last guy, is Amerigo Vespucci. Vespucci was Italian, but also working for the Portuguese and for the Spanish at one time or another. He was really working for the Medici family from Italy. What he does very quickly, a couple different voyages. One touches along the north coast of South America, what is today Venezuela, but his second and third voyages go to what is today Brazil. Vespucci is shown here in this drawing, painting, landing in the mainland of South America and what is Brazil. The only thing of great importance for Vespucci and his voyages is that he had contact with some of the cartographers in the Low Countries, in what is today the Netherlands, and he convinces one of those cartographers to put his name on the area that he had discovered. And so instead of calling the Western Hemisphere Colombia, we call it America, based on Amerigo Vespucci. Another character that's important for our story is this guy, Vasco Núñez de Balboa. He's one of these young men who if there still was the Reconquest, he would have made his mark via the Reconquest. He's a third son, so he's not have much future versus his family. There's Balboa. And he gets to the New World around 1500, very, very early, just a few years after the initial settlements by Columbus. He's part of the explorations of Colombia and Venezuela in 1501. He makes enough money as his share of an expedition in 1501 to be able to go back to Hispaniola and buy a big farm. And then he goes bankrupt. So to get away from his creditors in Hispaniola, he stows away on a ship that's going to sail to what is today Colombia. And they set up the first town on the mainland in 1509. Doesn't last very long at all, less than a year. So the natives are attacking. It's quite close to where Cartagena is. They set up this first settlement, abandoned very quickly. They sail to the west from near Cartagena to what is today Panama, far eastern point of Panama, and set up another settlement. That settlement in Panama, the first permanent settlement, Santa Maria de la Antigua, and Balboa becomes the mayor of that little settlement. It's at the far, far eastern corner of Panama. In fact, it's today the first town from the border of Colombia in this area. But this area of Panama is a very unpopulated area. It's called the Darien. Very few people live out there. Roads don't go through there. Very, very isolated. But that's where they choose to set up this little settlement. And there is a man that's designated as the governor of this whole area, a man by the name Nicosa. And Nicosa does some exploring in 1509 and 1510 from what is today Nicaragua and maybe even Honduras along the coast of Costa Rica, and ultimately Nicosa gets to Panama. He's not in good shape. He's been injured. Men have diseases, and a few men get with him to Santa Maria. They're going to set up the governorship there, but Balboa does not allow them to land and sends them off in a boat and tells them go back to Santo Domingo on Hispaniola. So Nicosa and 18 other guys sail off and are never seen again. Balboa is effectively the governor of what is today Panama. And Balboa does some exploring, what is today eastern Panama and Colombia, finds some gold. They go south from Santa Maria la Antigua into what is today Colombia and do find a fair amount of gold. This is the first really riches coming from the Western Hemisphere. They've got lots of local Indians working with them, and at one point in time they do discover the Pacific Ocean. Here's Balboa looking from the top of a hill and seeing the Pacific for the first time. On September 29th, they reach the Pacific. There's Balboa wading into the waters. And quickly they send back the messages, get all the way back to Spain, that there is this Southern Ocean. They've got lots of gold, and the crown gets 1/5 of everything they find. Spanish crown, and now this is Ferdinand. Isabella has died, but Ferdinand names a man by the name of Pedrarius, or Pedro Arias, as the new governor of this area. And Pedrarius arrives with 17 ships and over 1,500 men, so Balboa has no recourse except to accept Pedrarius as the governor. There was a short trial of Balboa, but he is let loose. He gets a minor punishment. And over the next couple of years, he does further exploring south and east in Panama. He's become a very wealthy individual. He marries Pedrarius' daughter. So Pedrarius becomes his father-in-law. The interesting thing is she never leaves Spain and he never goes back to Spain. So it's not a marriage that is really consummated, probably. He finds more gold. He becomes very wealthy. On this voyage, on this exploration in 1519, Pedrarius has really gotten jealous and upset with Balboa. And so on the way back to Santa Maria la Antigua, Balboa sends another guy out to arrest him, a man by the name of Francisco Pizarro, who we won't go into the story today, but Pizarro obviously is the conqueror of Peru. but Pizarro arrests Balboa, takes him back. Balboa denies that he was going to try to do anything and revolt or set up an independent kingdom or anything like that. But unfortunately, he is convicted, and he loses his life, gets his head chopped off. This is 1519, and I have to tell you, in this drawing, you see this big fancy church or whatever. There was no building like that in Santa Maria la Antigua in 1519, but Balboa does lose his life. 1519 also, they set up a town on the Pacific side. It was not really where Panama City is today. It's kind of east of modern Panama City. There's a little archaeological site. If you're ever there, you can visit. And very quickly, Pedrarius consolidates his rule. By 1519, 1520, 1521, Cortez has conquered the Aztecs in Mexico. Magellan has set sail, is the first to circumnavigate the world. We all know Magellan circumnavigated the world. No, he did not. He died in the Philippines, but some of his men made it back around to Spain. Pizarro, by 1520, 1521, had begun to think in terms of going to the south and Peru. So, very, very quickly, I'm going to show you a little bit of Cartagena. I try to give some suggestions for what our next stop or second to stop to be. This is one of the squares in front of one of the churches in Cartagena. This area was first settled in 1533. There was an earlier attempt, the one that Balboa was on, 1509, but the first real settlement is 1533 for Cartagena. And it became a city a few years later. It became one of the most important cities because it was where ships would stop at coming to the Western Hemisphere. It was repeatedly attacked by pirates, by the French, by the English, by the French, by the English. The second time for the English was a guy by the name of Sir Francis Drake, and if you were on a tour walking around and you stopped by the cathedral, in front of the cathedral, on the opposite side of the street, there's a house, and it's actually the house where Sir Francis Drake lived for almost a year in 1586. Again, we tend to think the Pirates of the Caribbean, pirates attack and run away. No, Sir Francis Drake was in Cartagena for almost a year. Because of these repeated attacks, the Spanish set up some fortresses there, and that's the cathedral. Just opposite is where that sign is. Here's the inside of the cathedral. For many, many years, it was being reconstructed, but it's now open. I took this picture a month ago in Cartagena. First time I was in Cartagena was in 1972, and I was up on a hill called La Popa. There's a monastery up there, and the biggest fortress in the Western Hemisphere done by the Spanish was San Felipe Fortress, you see there, or here. Several of the shore excursions will either stop by and you get a picture like this, or I think at least one of the shore excursions does include entrance into the fortress, climbing up, and you get a nice view of the old town from there. There's where Cartagena is located, to the east of Panama. We will be getting off the ship in what's called the cruise pier or cruise terminal. There are some of the shore excursions will take a small boat. You'll get off the ship and walk over to a little smaller boat, and you'll actually sail from there to what's called the Old Town. Others of you will be on buses that leave from the cruise terminal and simply drive over to the Old Town. Almost everything that we will do will be in the old part of Cartagena. This is a view again from La Popa. That area in the distance there is called Boca Grande. It's a big sandbar essentially, and that's 1972. And there's 2015. There are a few big buildings out on Boca Grande. There's 2019. That's Boca Grande. This is the old entrance, the main entrance into the old city. And many of the tours that you'll do will be walking around the old town. You get off on one side and come up on an opposite side. Some of you will do the hop on, hop off. But just walking around the old town, there's 1972. And one of my favorite spots is this church. San Pedro Claver is one of the Colombian saints. He was a Jesuit that is famous for ministering to the black slaves. This is the courtyard of the, essentially the capilla. There's San Pedro Claver ministering to the black slaves. And this is the inside of the church, the altar on the church. And that is San Pedro Claver. His body is underneath the altar, and you can actually see him. Many churches in Europe, you might find a church that says it's got the hand of St. James or the bone of something or other, some relic of Christ or whatever. This time it is the official saint. He's there right underneath the church. But you'll walk around the downtown area. These ladies always want to have you give them $1 for taking their picture, so I did not give $1. This woman, a nun, was inside the San Pedro Claver, and she was collecting money as people were leaving. One of my favorite things to do walking around is door knockers, and you will walk around. I love these door knockers. These kids were just out on the street. This is from, I think, 2 years ago. And of course, they're looking for tips. And this is not the same kids, but essentially doing the same thing. This is from last month. The square to the right where the wrought iron is, that's the Plaza Bolivar, which is the center of the old town. The white building in the background on the other side of the plaza is the Inquisition Palace, the House of the Inquisition. Now, I hadn't seen this guy before, but this is from a month ago, and I'm going to let this run for the entire time. He's painting. He's using a mirror as the thing he's painting on. This is not speeded up at all. This is real time. And the tour group that I was escorting there is standing around watching him.
Don't have snow in Cartagena, but in Colombia we have snow. In Colombia we have two peaks, Bolivar and Colombia. This is the highest peak in Colombia, or Sierra Nevada and Santa Marta. Look at the bushes, look at the bushes. Listen, this is very easy. You can practice at home, don't forget. Really, this is true. Look at the wave. Now, I take a little brush for detail. This is a night time.
2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you for, you feel this. You take it.
If you don't go to the old town, if you don't do much more than get off the ship and walk around a little bit, in the cruise terminal itself, there is a shopping area. Always got to be a shopping area in the cruise terminal, but there also is a menagerie behind it, and it's fun to walk around there. There are always some toucans, and there's some flamingos there. It is worthwhile at least getting off the ship to visit that. And there's usually a shuttle that will take you from the ship over to the place where the birds and the shopping is. My next lecture is going to be on Sunday morning. Today is Friday, so 2 days from now, and that lecture will be on a man, a plan, and a canal, Panama. It'll be the Panama Canal lecture. I always have a theory, 45 minutes. Realistically, we're in here for an hour most times, but for that lecture, Andy's going to give me an hour and a half. I need a little bit more time to cover the entire history and how it operates and the new canal and things like that. So 2 days from now, I'll always be at 10 o'clock in the morning, and hopefully see you then. I'm not sure if there's something in here going on. There's maybe rehearsals. So what I'm going to do is turn off my computer, and I'll go in the back just outside. If you have questions, let's do it out there just in case there's something else going on in here.